now. All right, so we're going to get started here with our lesson, and you should be able to see a full screen or a full window of the slide with a whole bunch of food on it, right?
Yum, yum.
Okay, all right, so we're getting into the necessities of life, part 2, and obviously it's going to be food-based today. That's why I've got slides full of food. So if you are done with class today and you're super hungry, now you know why, okay? Really what we're going to be talking about today is the food aspect of our necessities. Now yesterday we talked about the 4 necessities in the video of air, water, food, and shelter are all things organisms need to survive. And there's this thing called the rule of 3. And it's kind of the importance of survivability. So it starts with air. And most experts agree that when it comes to air, you can survive for about 3 minutes before you suffocate. When it comes to water, you can go about 3 days without water before your body shuts down. And then when it comes to food, you can last for up to 3 weeks without food before your body starts to deteriorate dramatically. So when it comes to rules of 3, obviously air is super important, right? Without it, we do suffocate. Now, the good thing is that most of our life, most of our situations, air is not a problem. Right? The world is surrounded by an atmosphere, and unless we're stuck in a confined space that's sealed off from the outside world, suffocation is not something we generally have to worry about. Okay? And water, you would say, okay, that's super important because, 3 days without water and your body shuts down, yeah, that's serious. But really our access to water in most of the world is not too difficult. There's water all over this planet. And yeah, there are places where water is scarce and hard to find, and that is a challenge for those locations, like in deserts. But for us in our lives, water is pretty easy to come by. So that brings us to food, okay? Now, food is important for energy to keep us going, but it's also important to make us who we are. You've heard the expression, you are what you eat, right? Well, that is absolutely true because when you eat food, you're taking in substances that your body's going to transform and turn into your cells, or it's going to use that substance to energize the cells so they can do their function. So without food, our bodies cannot sustain themselves. They will perish because we don't have what we need to survive. Okay? And that's what we're going to be talking about today is the building blocks of cells and focusing heavily on food. Okay? So, starting off here, I want to make sure I get to the right spot, okay, is we're going to start with carbs or carbohydrates. Okay? Now, carbohydrates are molecules that are made out of sugar. Our cells use carbohydrates as a source of energy, and we can also use it as a source to store energy in certain organisms as well. Organism cells, our cells, break down carbohydrates to release the energy inside. And there are 2 types of carbohydrates. The first type we're going to talk about is what's on your screen, is simple carbohydrates. Now, looking at the items on this screen, think about it for a moment. What do all of these items that are on the screen have in common?
They all taste better than veggies.
Okay, well, that's a matter of opinion. I need a fact observation.
They're all junk food.
Right. Sugar, right? Most all
Yes.
of these things are made from sugar. Okay, they're sugary. The other thing is that they're white. What we find out is carbohydrates that are white, like rice or white bread, are simple carbohydrates because they're made up of either just a single sugar molecule or a few sugar molecules that are linked together. Table sugar and sugar in fruits, for example, are examples of simple carbohydrates. And we can see candy and jelly and all that stuff on this screen. If I was to ask you, out of all these choices, which ones would be the best choice for eating carbohydrates, what would you say is the best choice on your screen right now?
Rice.
The bread.
The bread, the rice. I'm honestly looking at the two, what it looks kind of like peaches or something on the right hand side. And the reason why I look at that is because while peaches are sweet and sugary, they provide us with other nutrients that are going to be healthful to us. When I look at the other choices, the bread, the rice, and that sort of stuff, all I see is pure carbohydrates. I see very little nutrient value in those foods. Not saying that we shouldn't ever eat these, but what we want to do is we want to take a look at the simple carbohydrates versus the other type of carbohydrates that are complex carbohydrates. Okay? Now, a complex carbohydrate is made up of hundreds of sugar molecules that are linked together. They form molecules called starch. Now, the difference between starch and sugar is starch is not sweet. Even though it's made out of sugar molecules, it does not taste sweet. Now, our bodies can take the starch and break it down into simple sugars for our cells to use. Okay?
Like a potato?
Yeah, like a potato. All the things on this screen right here are good examples of complex carbohydrates. Now, when you have to make a choice to eat complex or simple carbs, the decision probably should go based upon the energy value of the food, okay? Simple carbohydrates foods are going to be sweet and they're going to provide you with a quick burst of energy, but it's going to wear off very quickly. Complex carbohydrates, however, are going to be burned off in the body much, much slower, providing you with sustained energy for a longer period of time. So, for example, like this morning, if I ate a bowl of oatmeal, like the upper left-hand corner on the screen, it says it has 66 grams of carbohydrates. Those carbohydrates are going to keep me energized throughout the entire morning. And it's not going to give me that sugar rush and then crash that sugary cereal like, Frosted Flakes or something like that might give me. Okay, I'll get a burst of energy from Frosted Flakes. I just won't get sustained energy all morning long. I'll be hungry in an hour or two. And, oatmeal might, allow me to last all the way till 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock before I need to eat lunch again. Okay? Complex carbohydrates, because they're hundreds of sugar molecules, our body processes them much more slowly. So one way of thinking of this is a simple sugar, a simple carbohydrate, is like if you've ever made a campfire and you're trying to get this fire started, you wad up a little bit of paper or something, put it into the wood. You light that paper and it burns bright and it burns hot, but it doesn't burn long, does it? Then you add small sticks and kindling to that. That also burns fairly bright, but the difference is it burns longer, right? There's more fuel there than there was when there was just paper. And that's what complex carbs do, is they provide us with ready energy that our bodies can utilize, but it doesn't burn out as quickly as a simple carbohydrate does. So when it comes to making choices, which is better? All right. Simple carbohydrates provide quick energy, but then they're burned off quickly in the body. Complex carbohydrates take longer to break down, and they provide longer lasting energy over time. So when we look at simple carbs versus complex carbs side by side, just looking at the images of what foods are there, and someone asked you which is better for you, the choice is pretty obvious, right? It's the complex carbs on top. Because if someone asks you which is the most nutritious, obviously the choices on top of this picture are much better than the ones on the bottom for nutritional purposes. Now, I'm never going to say you should never ever eat anything from the simple carb category. Because when I look at those foods, there's a lot of foods that are delicious and enjoyable. What we should do is we should focus less on simple carbohydrates, eat more of the complex carbohydrates, and save those simple carbs for times that are, that are for treats or occasional foods that we might have um,
Sandwiches.
our regular diet. Okay. What were you going to ask?
I said sandwiches.
Oh, yeah. But if I'm making a sandwich, you have two different types of bread, right? You have the whole wheat bread and you got the white bread. When it comes to providing you with good energy, that whole wheat is definitely the better.
It is whole wheat.
Okay?
You just have to have a lot of white bread and have a lot of Subway bread.
Yeah. All
But
right.
Yeah.
wheat bread tastes bad.
I eat Subway.
Okay. So moving on to the next nutrient. Okay, we talked about carbs. Now we're going to talk about protein. Okay, now
Meat.
earlier we were saying, there's a lot of people that have the opinion that carbs are bad, you gotta go low carb. Well, carbs do provide us with energy, and that is important for our existence. So carbohydrates do have to be part of our diet. But then we get to protein. And when they say low carb, what do they always say right with it? Low carb, high protein, right? And protein is a good thing to put into our body, because what proteins are they are large molecules that are made up of smaller units called amino acids. Now, these amino acids literally are the building blocks of our cells. So think of it this way. You have a chunk of Legos all stuck together, right? And you're going to build something. So what do you have to do? You got these random Legos put together, so you got to tear it apart to build something you want to build, right? Each and every individual Lego block is an amino acid. You take those individual blocks to create something new from your chunk of original random Legos that you were playing with. And that's what our body does with protein. It takes the protein, breaks it down into amino acids, then reassembles those amino acids back into body structures. So when we say you are what you eat, that's literally true. Because your body's tearing apart the food in your digestion and turning it into new cells. Excuse me, sneezing. Okay.
Bless you.
Now, looking here at this picture, there's a lot of foods that provide us with protein. Some animal-based, some plant-based. And we'll talk a bit more about those here as we go along. But proteins, the big thing here is to remember the nutrients in our food, in our proteins, becomes the building materials for our body. Okay, we break down the proteins into their individual amino acids and then link them together again to form new proteins. Some proteins are made up of only a few amino acids, but other proteins can require over 10,000 amino acids to complete it. So proteins can be made into a lot of different substances. Some are very, very complex. Okay. Now, some protein structures are easy for us to see, and others are very small and you can't really see without the aid of a microscope. But here's some examples of things that you can easily see that are made from proteins. Okay, some stuff you probably would have never guessed. All right. So to start off with, spider webs. Spider webs are literally strands of protein that the spider spins.
So you can eat a sprout.
Well, yeah, technically you could eat it, I guess. I don't know how good it tastes, but it is made of protein, and you can see it. When you look at animals, look at yourself even. When you see hair,
Cats.
you see horns, you see hooves, you see fingernails.
Toenails.
These are all made of protein as well.
Eats.
Okay? Feathers on birds are made of protein. Okay? Basically, when you look at any organism that, roams the earth or whatever, the structure you see
eat
is
them.
made from proteins. Okay, and that's how important it is to have in our diet, because without those proteins, we can't form our body. Okay,
Could you eat wood?
what's that?
Could you eat wood? Wouldn't that be protein?
Wood would be cellulose, which is a carbohydrate that cannot be digested.
Okay.
But when you look at animals and even plants, they do have proteins in them. Okay, so like you can see here on the screen, you can see avocados, you can see some Brussels sprouts, you can see seeds and nuts that are made from plants. Those are all made from protein.
Protein.
Okay, so let's take a look at some other examples here. Okay, here's some plant-based protein foods that provide us with a lot of protein if we eat them. You know, there are people out there that do not want to eat animal flesh for protein, and so
Vegans.
they've got to get their protein from somewhere, right? So there are plant-based protein choices that are going to be really, really good. And you can see here lots of vegetables. Some of these I'm sure you eat. And there's also a lot of seeds and nuts that contain a lot of protein as well. So when you look at a vegan lifestyle or a vegetarian-based lifestyle, there are lots of protein choices available to them. It's not just meat-based. Okay, now, if you're like me,
seed of avocado.
yeah, you can't eat the seed, but you can eat the flesh around it. Okay.
Okay.
When you look at these choices, I can see a lot of these things that I would eat on a regular basis, but also I'm a person who I have no problem eating meat. So when I look at protein choices for me, I see the fish, I see the pork, the beef, the chicken, that sort of stuff. But there's also in this picture here, you can see that it has nuts and beans and things like that that are high in protein as well. Eggs, definitely. And even milk. Milk is a great food to consume because not only does it give you protein, but it also provides you with some energy and carbohydrates. Okay?
Wait, so
You get a little bit of
cheese is good for you?
cheese is good for you, yeah. Now, keep in mind, all these foods are acceptable foods to eat. Even the ones we say are even bad, unhealthy foods, I'm not ever going to say you can't eat those. You just want to eat fewer of those compared to the healthier choices. Okay? All right. So that brings us now to the next one. Okay, the next nutrient. So we have carbohydrates up to this point, and then we have proteins. Now we're getting into the third nutrient called lipids. Okay, lipids by definition, lipids are a compound that cannot mix with water. Okay, fats and oils are lipids. Okay, so that's why we have the screen here that has all these different types of fats and oils that people might use in cooking. Okay,
You can mix butter and water.
Yeah, but they don't stay mixed; they separate. Okay,
Yeah,
so
over time.
the looking at these two, there is a difference between a fat and an oil. Okay, they're all considered lipids, but the difference between a fat and an oil is simply, generally speaking here, fats and oils are stored energy. Okay, our body stores extra energy in the form of fat. We know this. But when you look at them, the difference between a fat and an oil is it a solid or is it a liquid at room temperature? So when you look at these on the screen here, butter obviously is a fat. Ghee is also a fat because at room temperature it's a solid. Coconut oil, it says oil, but looking there, it's a solid at room temperature. Okay, these types of fats are different from the oils. Okay, a lot of fats are found in animal tissue, whereas oils are generally considered to be plant-based. Okay. Now, as we go through these lipids, what are they used for in the body? Well, first of all, lipids are stored energy. So when we run out of carbohydrates in our body automatically starts to turn to our body fat stores to generate not electricity, but energy for our cells. So when you work out and you exercise, you burn off your carbohydrates very, very quickly. And then your body's going to go to its stored energy reserves. So that's why, you know, when people want to lose weight, they have too much body fat, they go to the gym and they work out. Now, they have to be careful that they combine this with a proper diet, because if they're taking in more energy than they're actually working out at the gym, they're not actually losing body fat, okay? They want to eat properly and then exercise so that they are using up not just the energy from the food they eat, but also the extra energy that their body fat's going to provide them as they work out. And then over time, what happens is their body fat drops and people, you know, lose weight and tend to trim down and become less obese. Okay. Now, fats also go into the creation of cell membranes. Okay. Lipids are needed to create cell membranes by forming molecules called phospholipids. Okay. Now, a phospholipid is a molecule that forms almost all of the cell membranes found in our body. It is made out of phosphorus and lipids, a fat. Okay. Now, what this does is this creates a barrier that surrounds the cell that protects the cell. Okay. Now, the phosphorus head, the round part that you see on your screen, attracts water. It likes water. The lipid, which makes up the tails, or the little, what looks like legs there, repels water. So by creating the structure you see on the screen, it creates a skin or a barrier around a cell that helps to regulate the water inside the cell with the water outside the cell in the body. And this keeps a nice stable balance that leads us back to homeostasis again, that keeps the cell stable. Okay? So when the phospholipids are in water, the tails come together and the heads face out into the water, and it shows how the on the screen here how that works, where one layer will be facing to the outside, the other layer is facing to the inside, and it's maintaining a proper balance with the internal and external environment. So even lipids can be used to build our body. So while we look at carbohydrates and proteins and lipids, we have to eat foods that provide us with the nutrition we need. But at the same time, we need to make good choices, because some foods are definitely better than others. Okay, so keeping on this kick here about lipids, we look at saturated and unsaturated fat. Okay, now looking at the two pictures side by side, I see a lot of foods that I personally like to eat on both sides. But if I was looking at which type of fats would be healthier for my body, I would want to go with the unsaturated fat side more than the saturated fat, because unsaturated fat is what we refer to as our oils, and oils are generally speaking healthier for our bodies than saturated fats. Okay, and remember the difference between a fat and an oil was that the fat is solid at room temperature, whereas oils tend to be liquid at room temperature. So when I look at these two side by side, while I like, you know, meats and sausages and things like that, when I look at the right-hand side, I see a lot of things that are better and healthier for my body that still provide me with the lipids I need from day-to-day living, okay? So we want to balance it, healthy versus unhealthy, right? Okay, now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of sources that provide us with nutrients we need. And you can see here, this is considered to be saturated fat in this picture. You see meats like pork chops and bacon and sausage. You also see cream and butter and even milk has fat in it. The thing is when you eat these foods, you need to consume less of them. It'll give you what you need, but you can definitely overdo it. You can eat too much, and then you have other health problems like cholesterol and high blood pressure and things like that. Okay. Now, there is one type of fat that you should always try to avoid. Okay, and that's the fat found in this type of food. Okay. Now, I can look at this picture and I can honestly say, boy, some of those things look pretty good, and I would like to have a Big Mac right now, you know? And I'm sure a lot of you feel the same way. You look at it and you're like, hey, I eat this stuff all the time. Well, here's the thing. Fast food is not a good combination because it has a lot of fat. Specifically, it has trans fat in it. Trans fat is a lipid that has been linked to a lot of health problems. High cholesterol, heart disease, high blood pressure, even certain types of cancers have been linked to trans fat. And this is something you definitely want to avoid because trans fat is definitely not healthy for you. In fact, it's so unhealthy the United States has banned trans fat in a lot of foods. And so foods that we would eat a lot, 10 years ago as snack foods don't exist today in their original recipes. They had to substitute those trans fats for other forms of lipids that would be hopefully a bit more healthier. But it also has a lot of simple carbs. So when you combine high fat and high carbohydrates in the form of simple carbs, this is just poor nutrition, okay? Your body will digest this and try to make the best it can out of it. But when you're using poor ingredients to create your body, you get poor results, okay? And so we want to eat more healthy, well-rounded foods that provide us with lots of nutrition and avoid those that are low nutritive qualities, I guess you would say. Okay, now, I'm never going to say, and I've said this many times already today, I'm never going to say don't eat a cheeseburger, don't eat a donut, don't drink a soda, but you should limit how much of that stuff you actually do consume. Once in a while is fine, but on an everyday basis, on a regular basis, as part of our diet, it's just a combination that's going to lead you to a very unhealthy life. Okay? So, have a cheeseburger now and again, but balance it out with lots of fruits and veggies in between. And that should make a lot of sense. Okay? All right, I'm going to come back here and stop the recording.